All stories could be broken down into this. Someone, somewhere did something for some reason and it was worth telling. The someone is your character, the somewhere is your setting, the something is your plot, and the some reason is your antagonist. If you get all of those guys locked in solid, then you'll be fine. It's where we mess up on some of those, that's where we get writer's blocks. Writing tip. Sometimes a character death can be a really great way to build up tension and create in the audience a sense that things are actually potentially dangerous. However, this technique does not work too well when writing your autobiography. Writing tip. Perfect characters suck. People don't like to read them. Simple as that. However, we have this tendency to want to make our characters not have any flaws whatsoever because we think that it's being too mean to them. However, it's the flaws in the characters that actually make the readers relate to them better. So, what you're going to want to do is follow this general guideline. For every 2 virtues you give your character, give them 1 flaw. This way, you create someone that has a lot of good things in them, but they've got some bad things that they need to counter. On the flip side, if you decide that you want to make a villain, give them 2 flaws for every 1 virtue. Give them something that the audience can relate to. If the audience relates to the villain, they will sympathize, empathize, and actually care about what happens to them. Writing tip. Video games are actually really good for the writing process. Yes, believe it or not, the thing that's awesome about video games is that video games will have a plot, it'll have a story, and granted, it's one that you as the character are actively going through, but certain elements still play, certain elements still have to take into consideration. So, when you're going and you're trying to think, how do I even plot out this book? Look at the video games that you actually like to play. If you enjoy things like Star Wars, look at Star Wars games. If you enjoy things like Lord of the Rings, look at Lord of the Rings type games. Look at those kinds of games to give you ideas on how they put together the plot, how they put together their characters, and how they put together the crazy awesome antagonists. Remember, you can get inspiration from everything, hopefully including me. Writing tip. Change the length of your sentences. The different lengths of sentences will read differently to different people and they give different meanings. For example, you're going to use short sentences when you want to do really fast points, stuff that people are going to read quickly and it's really intense. However, you're going to want to slow things down and do a little bit longer sentences on the things that you want people to stay in and focus on more. By having longer sentences, it actually makes the reader feel like they're in the moment a little bit longer, whereas fast sentences, they're right there like that right now. Writing tip. A terrible first draft is better than no draft at all. If you wait until you are good, then you're never going to write it. So, however, it's by writing it that you actually get good. So, if you think, man, I really want to write this book, but I'm not sure if I'm ready, no, you're ready. Just do it, and then work with it from there. Writing tip. Stan Lee once said, if you've got an idea that you think sounds good, don't let some idiot talk you out of it. Well, I'm here to be that dude that says, you gotta write it. See, when we have an idea that we actually care about, that we actually think needs to be written, those are the stories that we're gonna care more about. Forget about the stories that we think are gonna be the mainstream ones. Forget about the stories that we think are gonna be the popular ones. The ones that we want to write. Those are the stories that are gonna come out the best. So, if you have an idea for a story that you wanna write, and people are saying it's the wrong genre, just forget about them. Forget about them. Write the story that you need to write because, hey, who knows? Maybe what you're going to do is you're going to start a new revolution. Writing advice. So, you guys have seen me writing in a book a lot when it comes to some of my short poems and some of the Celtic Knot stuff. Well, truth be told, it's actually a book that I made. Conveniently titled Notebook for World Building and Fantasy Writing. It has blank pages with a parchment-like texture for writing, completely blank pages for pure drawing, and also grid pages for some more detailed oriented work. But wait, there's more, because I also have this, a way to create a fantasy map, and it's going to take you from this basic blob here to a finished product of this one right here in a very nice step-by-step process. So, if that is something you're interested in, I will leave the link down in the comments. Writing tip. All writers need two things at all times. First, a pencil that's got a good eraser and enough lead to do whatever, and secondly is a good pen, because you never know when inspiration is going to strike. Paper is always available, but you're not necessarily going to have a pen. Writing tip. Everyone knows that writing is easy when it's easy. The problem is sometimes you're going to write and words just aren't coming. For some reason, you're just having a hard time figuring out where you want things to go or how to say what you want to say. So here is something that I suggest for a lot of writers. It is have multiple projects. Yes, not just work on one project at one time. That's, some people can, but for others, you're going to find that you get creative and then suddenly you have this weird stop. And the best way to counter that is to work on something else. You see, when you do that, you keep being creative and you keep working, you keep progressing. And when you keep progressing, you keep on getting better. So if you find yourself struggling, start a new project. You've got other ideas out there, make them happen. Writing tip. All stories have some form of an antagonist, whether it be a person or something else entirely. And in my experience, my research, the breakdown has been as follows. First, you have the Dark Lord, who's the evil for evil's sake, wants to destroy the world, blah blah blah. Then you've got that evil character that actually has a reason that they became evil and is actually believable. Then you've got that character that's just in the way of the protagonist, whether they're a co-worker or maybe they're another person going after a love interest, either way. Then you've got the fourth one that's going to be stuff like nature or forces. So like, I'm going to include diseases, I'm going to include gravity, I'm going to include time in this kind of stuff. I'm going to include space, and then natural disasters like, asteroid, tornado. And then the last one is going to be the actual the protagonists themselves. Stuff like any kind of mental issues that they need to deal with, maybe a split personality, maybe it's something like a dark side that they're very tempted by, like Luke Skywalker. Writing tip. Everyone knows that the weather is pretty important just for general life. However, one thing that you don't always realize is that weather is extremely important when it comes to stories. Oftentimes, we'll look at the weather and we'll use that to determine what the mood of the scene is supposed to be. For example, when things are dark and stormy, things are going to be generally kind of more depressed. When the sun is bright and shining and everything is all happy-dory, generally things are going to be a little bit more on the lighter side. So, one thing that you can do to actually make your writing a little bit more interesting is to play with that. When those days are the dark and cloudy ones, let good stuff happen. Just mess with people. When those days are bright and sunny, let a lot of trouble and calamity come about. Doing so will help the reader to actually not anticipate all the time, and then they'll be pleasantly surprised when they encounter whatever they encounter. Writing tip. When trying to figure out how much description you need for something, try thinking about it from a character's perspective. For example, if a character has grown up in an area that only uses wooden chairs, and now suddenly they're in a classroom setting that uses plastic chairs, they're going to describe that chair quite a bit. They're going to focus on that plastic chair for quite a bit. As opposed to if someone had grown up in a regular school system, then that plastic chair is just a basic plastic chair. So use those kind of descriptions to give your audience a better idea of what your characters are thinking and what they focus on and what they care about to focus on. Because they're not going to focus on the things necessarily that they're already familiar with, but they'll focus on the new. So, writing tip. Not all flaws are necessarily bad things. For example, you could have a character who is very stubborn. Now, sometimes being stubborn and not compromising can be a terrible thing. On the other hand, when you have a character that's very firm in their beliefs, being stubborn is actually a positive thing. In the same way, if you've got a character that gets very passionate about everything that they do, well, if they don't have a down notch, then they'll constantly be in that state of hyperactivity, so they'll not necessarily be able to operate under calm. But if you've got a character like that, they're the kind of person that can get people fired up about any kind of thing. So when you look at your character flaws, just remember that you can turn them around and you can actually make them into positive things. Writing tip. Remember how in Lord of the Rings, after the Council of Elrond, they decided that they were going to take the ring to Mordor, they flew on eagles, dropped it in, the whole book was done in about a chapter? Yeah, that's because it naturally didn't happen. Well, why didn't it happen? See, when the original plan was to take the ring to Mordor, the idea was they need to be secret. They didn't want Sauron to actually know that they were doing this, and if they had gone in and had just taken the eagle straight, it would have been the very obvious choice. However, he would have noticed that. So, in solution to that, they realized that they had to take the longer path, and that ended up becoming the story that we know and love. So, when you're writing, think about the solutions to the problems, and then if a solution is so terribly obvious, think of what the consequences of said solution would be, because oftentimes it's the alternatives to that that's going to make the real story. So follow me for more tips.